Okay. Thank you. Item 1, apologies for absence. Khaled.
The only apologies were from Councillor Jeanette Sunderland and Paul Davis of Kirklees, and Councillor Upal is here as a substitute for Councillor Davis.
Oh, well done, thank you. Item 2, formalities, declarations of disclosure of opinion interests. No. 3, thank you. 3, possible exclusion of press and public. That doesn't apply, does it? 4, minutes of the last meeting held on November 19th. Does anybody want to raise anything on those 6 pages of those?
Chair?
No?
Chair, could
Sorry,
I?
Betty, yes, come on.
Yeah, could I ask a question, Chair?
Yeah.
The meetings of the last, the minutes of the last meeting and of today's. When will any recommendations out of those be able to be affirmed? Because the scrutiny doesn't make decisions, but we make recommendations. They've got to be caught up on at some point. What's the process, Chair?
Khaled, you know more about this than I do.
I mean, because this is an informal meeting, it would have to wait until the next meeting when we're in person, and it's a formal quorum meeting for us to adopt any. So, for example, these minutes really today are just for information. They'd have to go to the next meeting as well to be adopted.
Sorry, but well,
I appreciate that, Chair. If I just could come back. Scrutiny recommendations, as I understand it, I mean, we've just had a management board meeting where we've looked at the budget in Wakefield and all over, I'm assuming, in terms of scrutiny. And that meeting was held via Zoom or whatever channel, whatever platform. But the recommendations out of it can go ahead because they're not a decision-making issue. So when we come to the meeting in face-to-face, which will be soon, I hope, we will have 3 sets of recommendations. 1, 2, no, we'll have 2, won't we? We'll have 2 sets of recommendations to be ratified. I mean, I think it would be an impossible agenda to have both sets of the previous minutes to the next meeting, which is going to have its own minutes. Is there a simplified version in the recommendations that can go forward?
Who can help us that, Khaled? Is there a process for applying common sense?
I mean, I think there weren't any formal recommendations. The last meeting was just the mayor's questions item. So it's largely just asking questions to the mayor, and it's more of a discussion around those topic areas. So there weren't any formal recommendations made at the last meeting. So there's not really anything to ratify. But obviously, depending on what happens today, and Angela's got a hand up, but she can.
Okay, thank you, Khaled. It's just for information for everybody, because I know our scrutiny isn't a decision-making body, it's a recommendation-making body. And if there was any recommendations, then those to go forward to the CA would be the issue relevant to a face-to-face meeting.
Very sensible. Angela?
Okay.
yeah, I think if I can just clarify, it is an odd world we find ourselves in, where the legislation doesn't really allow proper good decision making and governance to be done as we want it to. I think technically, Khaled is absolutely right. We cannot formally approve minutes here. However, if there are decisions, the delegations across all of our committees, the delegations do enable managing director to take those decisions outside the meeting. However, as Councillor Rhodes said, much of this is about informing and shaping and feeding information back into ongoing processes. And we won't wait for, we don't need the formal minutes for us to do that. So your comments today on the assurance framework, your comments on the budget, we will take those away and enact them. And you will at a subsequent meeting agree the minutes as a true record of that. But it won't stop us acting on the information that you share with us today, if that's helpful.
Well, it explains the position, doesn't it? Yes, thank you. Councillor Swift?
Thank you. I think you probably know what I'm going to say. I've missed some of these meetings because they haven't been online. Most people seem to do hybrid ones, but I can't now get to this meeting because I'm having tests for an illness. So in effect, and I've said this to Cameron, not his fault at all. Democracy is being, well, I don't know what it's being done, but I feel very let down that when you have a proper meeting that makes decisions, I'm probably not going to be able to come.
Thank you. That's a useful point. We'll pick that up, Colin. We'll take that on. Thank you. I can't see any other hands. Andrew, it's just a one-word answer, really. And in the minutes, there's a reference to borrowing against gain share. I think we're coming back to that later in the morning. But there hasn't been any yet, has there?
Correct, there hasn't been any yet.
That's fine. Thank you. Item 5, Chair's comments and updates. My only comment is, please God, this is the last meeting we have like this. This is 90% unsatisfactory, and the sooner we get back to meeting each other. What's the timetable now? Angela, Caleb, when do we think, Caleb, when we'll be able to go to Wellington Street again?
We're looking at whether we can hold the March meetings in Wellington House. Clearly, we're looking at the rules have changed this week from government, so clearly we're looking at all our upcoming meetings to see if we can move them back to being in person, whether it be Wellington House or in other premises. So hopefully, fingers crossed for March, we know that to be back in person for that.
Well, I think we all agree that this is unsatisfactory. Are there no meetings taking place in Wellington Street at present?
No, with the contractors have only just finished their work. There's quite a list of final tidying up, mobilising, operationalising much of the things in place. So we're not using Wellington House at the moment. As most members are probably aware, we have had everybody work, pretty much all the office-based people have been able to work from home since March 2 years ago. So we're continuing with that, and we're looking at how we are able to start bringing people back into a workplace along with everybody else. Having the rules have changed, but there's obviously the world of work has also changed in that timescale, and I don't think any of us will expect to go back to full-time being in the office again, but clearly we understand that the arrangement of meetings is there's a clear desire to be face-to-face, and then that has the issues it brings with it of trying to ensure everybody's able to get to meetings and be quorate for those conversations and discussions.
Well, will the rules about we expect you to be in the office and not working from home apply to the combined authority?
Where people at the moment, we have relaxed all our policies to enable people to do their job where they can best do their job, which obviously under the restrictions has been from home. We've been doing surveys throughout the last few years, actually, and we're currently in the middle of a terms and conditions consultation, which will, we think, end up with embedding more flexible approaches to work. People today want a mix. They want the option. Some people want to be in an office. Some people want to be at home. Some want a bit of both. And we're hoping to be able to use that. And that will be a sort of benefit of working for the combined authority, that people will have that option. Clearly, if they're required to be in the building for a meeting, they will have to come into the building for that meeting. So it will be a hybrid approach. And I think most organisations and local government bodies are going down the same route. It helps with retention, it helps with attracting people into roles, but it's getting that balance right so it works for the people that we are working for.
I think we just ask you to note that, as far as I know, all councillors prefer to be able to see each other, to meet face to face. Can we note that, Ben? Can we note that?
Yeah, we have a meeting suite designed in the new building to absolutely enable that, and that will be the priority for the rooms, to enable councillors and external meetings to come together.
Ben, do you want to add anything?
Thank you, Chair. I don't think so. I mean, Angela's covered the covered the main points. We are as keen to get back to face-to-face meetings, and indeed we have to do that for them to be in line with the regulations, as you know. But as Angela says, I think in terms of the organisation, we will be returning to a hybrid model of working, which is both what the organisation, what the staff are saying they want, and also is the kind of business model that we've now created around Wellington House.
Thank you. I have nothing else to say. Item 6, assurance framework.
Peter, I've
Sorry.
had my hand up. Sorry, darling.
I do apologise.
No, it wasn't unanimous.
Oh, sorry.
By any means. I'm still clinically vulnerable. Therefore, and COVID is still with us, and this variant might be on the wane, but who knows what variant is out there in the world waiting to hit us. So whilst I absolutely accept that legally we have to meet in person, and I accept that things have to move towards a new normal, I think we still have to give ourselves the flexibility, depending on what happens in the world, to actually have remote meetings. And often we find attendance is better at a lot of the meetings that I attend anyway, with remote meetings, and you attract some really good contributors because they don't have to come out of London, they don't have to come out of Manchester, they can contribute on Zoom and whatever. So whilst I very much look forward to coming in and meeting everybody again, I absolutely accept that the way we work as a committee will need to be flexible still, depending on what happens, but also in the world of work in general. I mean, Angela's got it right. You know, we need to be flexible. People's lives have changed over the last 2 years. And if you often get more work and a better quality work out of people if they've got that flexibility than forcing them to fight their way in on public transport, where people don't have to wear masks anymore. To come into work. So it wasn't necessarily unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. Yes, duly reprimanded. Very good. Item 6, unless I'm not missing any other hands, no, all right. Item 6, Mr. Taylor is going to introduce these 78 pages.
Yes, hi there. Craig Taylor, I'm the head of Portfolio Management and Assurance at the Combined Authority. If I give you a quick run through of why we're presenting this paper today, and then if you've got any questions for me, please do. As hopefully most of you are aware that last year we did a completely wholesale review of the assurance process, and we actually changed the assurance framework quite a lot last year, based on some consultation that we'd done with partners and so forth, and throughout the CA. So we had quite a big change last year. As you know, we have to do a review every year because government send new guidance through every year to enable us to do that. The guidance this year was actually very, very minimal. Change in guidance was very minimal, so therefore the changes in our assurance framework are very minimal this year as well. And we've purposely kept it quite minimal because we're still embedding the reasonably major changes that we made last year. So we don't want to complicate matters by completely reviewing it again this year. Just to make you aware that we have actually updated the assurance framework twice since it came to this meeting last February, and that was mainly because the mayor came into post, so there were some changes that we had to make because the mayor was in post, but also we looked at the committee structure, and the committee structure is completely different now to when we wrote the assurance framework last February, so we had to make some amendments to take account of that. But they've gone through separately and have been updated, and we had a delegation through to be able to do that, so that has been done. So the changes that we've proposed, I've noted the key changes, although they're very small within the paper, and also hopefully you did get it in the end, but we did send you a copy of the assurance framework with track changes on it to show where we changed it. I think there was something went wrong with the PDFing of the papers originally, but hopefully you've got that through now. And I think the last thing to mention is that this has gone to a number of committees. It's going to it's going to the LEP board later this month, and then it'll go to the Combined Authority on the 3rd of February for the final sign off, and then that will go through to government for them to sign it off as well and approve it for the coming year. So any questions really?
Questions for Mr. Taylor? Andrew, you're muted, Andrew.
I'm unmuted. Right. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for the report. Had a good look through it. There's the reference to the robust quantifiable methodology for assessing all new schemes using their predicted carbon emissions and wider growth impacts, and that has been developed. I'd be interested to see it actually. I don't know if I've missed it somewhere, but it'd be good to sort of look at that and have a look at what it comprises of. And, because if it's robust, it'd be good to have a look at it and test that out a bit. So I'd be interested to look at that. 7.8. It's appraisal proportionality. And there's a phrase in here which gives rise to a question for me. And in the 4th paragraph down, it says, it is important to note the Combined Authority's climate change aspirations. As part of 2021, the authority's methodology for carbon assessment forms part of the appraisal process. A proportionate approach will be utilised and guidance will be given on a scheme-by-scheme basis on the level of requirement. Now, it's the phrase, a proportionate approach, which slightly troubles me, because I'm sort of wondering whether a proportionate approach might be, well, actually, we need to build this road. It's important, and it's more important than the carbon emissions. And I just wonder, because proportionate may well be sort of throw in what one person thinks is proportionate may be different from what someone else thinks is proportionate. And I'm just wondering how far judgment is being applied to deliver a proportionate approach.
Mr. Taylor?
Okay, so the carbon impact tool, as we're calling it at the moment, is just being finalised as we speak, actually, for us to start using properly. So at the moment, we tend to use, for the transport projects, we use the calculations that come through TAG, if people know what TAG is, and we use we do the carbon calculations from that. But going forward, we will be using the carbon impact assessment tool, which is just about to be approved. Within that, there is quite a lot of guidance, and within there, it determines the proportionality that you can use, and I think it's more around the type of project rather than different transport schemes get a different proportionate look at. It's because we've got all sorts of different schemes, transport and non-transport schemes, so that determines how we actually calculate the carbon coming through for that project, embodied carbon and also operational carbon. So that's what that's more around, but particularly around, and then around the assurance process, we have proportionality about how many decision points and how many activities it has to go through as well. So the carbon impact tool tells you what you need to do at every single stage, but some of those stages might be jumped because of the complexity or the nature of the projects as well. So that needs to be taken account of as well.
Okay, thanks. So though it says, I don't want to be picky, honestly, but it did say that it has been developed and in the report, but you're saying it's been finalised, and so it's
So basically, this comes into place after February the 28th, and I think the tool will be in place for when this starts being used in March this year.
And is there going to be a place where we can scrutinise it, to have a look at it, come to a judgment as to be explained to us why it's a robust methodology as it's described? It'd be good to have a look at that.
Sorry, I don't know if we're going to publish that at all. Maybe Ben can answer that question, but we probably will do. But with regards project by project, when we've done those calculations, we have actually got a specific section in the capital approvals report that we send to committees for decisions. And within that, we've got a carbon impact implications section, and we detail in there how carbon has been in the implications of carbon of each of these projects, and that should note down how we've calculated it and so forth. But I'm assuming the tool itself will be published at some point.
Yeah, I think that's right, Andrew. And sorry to come in, but I think that's right. And the March meeting of the Climate Committee, Councillor Cooper, is where we were looking to kind of take the assessment and the outcomes. And I think as we trailed at the last meeting of the Climate Committee.
Okay, thanks. I'll be there.
Thank you. Any other questions on the 78 pages? Jeff?
Yes, Chair, thank you. Just a couple of questions. It appears that the decision-making on projects appears, at least on paper, to be fairly robust, certainly at the beginning of projects. I wonder, what are the arrangements in terms of, I suppose I would describe as mid-project scrutiny and indeed coming towards the end of projects? What are the arrangements when overspends appear to happen, and what sort of contingencies are there to address overspends? Because I mean, my experience with public sector projects is that when overspends tend to occur, often it's so late in the process that it just seems to be swallowed up and nothing's done about it. Is there a mechanism to pull spending on projects back into line in our project process? And the second issue, I suppose, is around the it's a strong, robust process, at least on paper. Could it be in some circumstances it's overly rigid, and in some circumstances there might need to be a degree of flexibility to address some projects which might need to be moved forward rather quickly, more quickly than the process might allow?
Okay, thank you. I'll deal with the second one first, if that's okay. So we do have complete flexibility within the assurance framework. So we've got the 7 activities and the 7 decision points. And for the less complex, the less sensitive projects, we can, through that, we don't have to do all 7 activities and 7 decision points. We can actually use just 2 or 3 of those activities and decision points. And we have quite often already used, so when something comes at decision point 2 to the combined authority, because every project has to go to the combined authority at decision point 2, we do actually quite often, for some of the projects, that is the full approval. That doesn't then need to go through to OBC and FBC. We do that all through that one decision point, and that gives us real flexibility, and it gets projects through the system a lot quicker. But we don't do that for the big complex transport schemes, for instance. It's we decide on a case-by-case basis which projects come through from that point of view. We are also just working on a business justification report case as well, rather than the SOC, to make, because it does the strategic outline case doesn't always fit all of the projects that we do. So we're actually now looking at a business justification report to come through that system as well. So it's more proportionate to the lower value schemes in particular. With regards to the midpoint reviews of projects, the biggest gap that we have with projects is when they've brought their outline business case in, and then they work on their projects to get to full business case, because that's when they do the majority of the design work. And they'll have been out to consultation, but they'll do the final consultation as well within that period. So we have a change request process that we ask all our partners and ourselves to do when we think there's going to be an overspend, and to make sure that that happens is that, particularly for all of our projects, because the majority of our projects are actually led by our partner districts, we have in our delivery team, we have programme managers, and programme managers look after each of those districts from transport and a non-transport perspective. So they discuss and they know all the detail of those projects. So when they see that a project is going out of scope or the costs are going up or whatever it may be, they will highlight that to us, and we'll ask them to bring a change request through if they are needing more money and so forth. The other way we do that is that we have regularly now a transport fund review and also a Transforming Cities Fund yearly review, where we go back to the partners and ask them to relook at their projects and come back to us and determine whether or not there's any delays that they want us to take account of, or whether or not there's any money that they need additionally, whether or not that be for further development costs or the actual whole total project costs. So that's the way that we tend to deal with it.
Just to clarify then, if there's a significant overspend on the project and that's been identified and the process has been followed, does it become a political decision whether to proceed or to make the decision about what to do about it?
Yep. So in the insurance framework, we set tolerances for each of the projects. As a general rule on a transport project, we'd give a 5% tolerance on the cost. Now, that's not a contingency. What that means is that if they can keep their costs within 5%, we can go to the managing director and Ben can make that decision. But if it's over 5%, it then does have to go to the committee. But again, we have complete flexibility on that tolerance that we set. So some of the projects will have a 5% tolerance, but some of them will have a 0 tolerance, for instance, depending on what that project is and what the funding is available. And just one thing I forgot to mention was that we have now come up with a list of what we call exceptional circumstances that we gauge each of the asks for more money in particular against, to see whether or not they're appropriate to use and actually approve more money going through the process.
I mean, I think the committee might be interested to understand what those exceptional circumstances are, perhaps at some later point. Thanks.
Right, we have got those, and they were agreed with the place committee, actually, formerly the investment committee.
Thank you. Ben?
Chair, thank you. Just to add to Craig's comprehensive answer, that so the short answer is Councillor Winard, is that over that tolerance level, then yes, it is a political decision, as to a committee decision as to whether projects proceed. It doesn't make any easier where we would find any additional funding for, and typically within programs that have got a fixed amount in the fund, that becomes the challenge. How do you manage the program and individual projects cost changes in that context? And I guess it allows me to make a more general point, which is I think we are approaching just such an occasion now, because we are seeing considerable inflation in the supply chain, in particular material costs, and so the costs of the estimated costs of projects and the actual cost of projects appears to be rising, and we don't see that that's going to change, and that's going to create some significant pressures for us going forwards.
Mike of Calderdale.
Thank you, Chair. I apologise if I misunderstood or didn't quite hear it correctly. And then this was in relation to Councillor Cooper's point, because obviously 2.6 in the report states that the combined authority has developed an approach to carbon appraisal, which forms an integral part of the insurance framework. But we're not actually seeing it. So if it forms an integral part of the insurance framework, why aren't we seeing it? And I didn't quite understand whether we had a proper answer to that, or not a proper answer to that. And if I misunderstood, I apologise. But I wasn't sure we really answered that part. If we're having something which is an integral part of the insurance framework, it needs to be in the insurance framework.
Well, I think that's just being finalised at the moment. So when the new version of the insurance framework comes in, that will be an integral part of it, and we will publish. I think we've confirmed that we will publish that. But if people feel that should be probably an appendix to the insurance framework, I don't think there's a particular issue with doing that either.
Yeah, can I help clarify as well?
Well, just jump in.
So I mean, just to reiterate what Craig has said, there are lots of technical methodologies that underpin the assurance framework that are not technically part of the assurance framework. They all get published. So it might not be the assurance framework itself document, but we'll definitely publish that, and we can make that available to the committee if that will be helpful.
I think we're in favour of more information rather than less at all stages, yes. Harpreet, your motion?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask about LEPs and scrutiny of LEPs. You know, LEPs do some great work, but there have been concerns around the accountability and governance of LEPs. And you've got a little bit there about what you're doing around scrutiny. And I guess I just wanted to ask yourselves if you feel assured in terms of scrutiny that is in place and the governance that is in place for the LEP.
Who can answer for the LEP? Ben, I presume? Oh, Angela.
I can. Yeah. Angela first.
Can fight for it. A good question. The way we are set up is that the LEP, we are the combined authority is the accountable body for the LEP. So all the money they're spending is all going through the assurance framework, and the assurance framework it is contained in the 78 pages somewhere that how that works. In terms then of additional scrutiny, the scrutiny committee of the combined authority within the terms of reference can look at any of the activities going on within the organisations. And indeed, in previous years, there's been quite a focus, for example, on business grants. So there's been scrutiny on the business grants process, which is one would package as a LEP activity, but that has come through here. So there is absolute ability for the scrutiny committees to look at any aspect of LEP funded activities, but it is all covered under the same rule book that we operate for other funding that comes through the combined authority. So we believe that gives us a good position in terms of governance, and certainly the annual reviews that government do, we have come out well on that front every year that I can remember.
Thank you. Ben, do you want to add to that?
I think the only thing I would say just is a general comment that the LEP is subject to all of the scrutiny functions that the combined authority is. We don't differentiate between the two.
Can I ask a supplementary to Councillor Winard's point about potential overspends? How would that emerge? How would people here today be aware that a project which was going to cost 5 million is now going to cost 6 million, instead of taking 2 years, going to take an extra 3 months? Is there a public document or semi-public document we can look at for that?
Yep.
Overspends occur gradually. They don't. It's rarely a big bang. And Ben's point about we ain't seen nothing yet for overspends is entirely appropriate. How do we become aware that these overspends are creeping up on us?
Well, if it, as I mentioned, the tolerances. So if it's within the tolerance, Ben can make that decision, and that gets reported. But it gets reported through all the committees, through the committees as well. So we report any change requests that Ben has approved, or any FBCs or whatever he's approved, we do through the committees. But if they, as I say, if they go beyond that tolerance, it has to come through a committee for them to approve that change. So that will be out in the public, of course.
Which committee does it go to?
That very much depends on the project itself. Now that we've got the new committee structure, so previously everything went to investment committee or combined authority. Now it goes to combined authority at decision point 2 always, but then they delegate down to the appropriate committee. So at the moment, the majority of projects are going to the place committee, including the transport projects, because there's still the review of the transport committee going forward. We've had one to the climate committee that went a couple of weeks ago, and then there's the business committee, and also the employment and skills committee. So employment and business tend to deal with our economic services type projects, and then place tend to always deal with the transport and the housing and regeneration type schemes.
Can I just add to that, please, Chair, that we also then pull all the reporting together for finance, both revenue and capital, to the Finance, Resources and Corporate Committee. So those, as Craig says, they have to go to the relevant committee to be considered, but the overall picture of all the funding being drawn together is being done through the Finance Resources Committee, who will get an overall, a regular update on the overall shape of the capital programme and any risks within it, which is indeed informed by all those conversations that Craig's just talked about and those decisions being made at committees. So that's a place where it's drawn together, probably in a more accessible way than having to go through each committee papers to identify the overall impact on the combined authority.
So again, I'm sorry if this is in the 78 pages, but how would that be drawn to our attention? Would we anticipate that we'd look for it, or we'd have some sort of...
I wonder if that's...
Would you tell us without our asking?
It's a difficult one because we tend to have a level of risk on these. We very rarely actually have, and historically, I can't recall us having unexpected overspend that hadn't been forecast and dealt with. Generally, projects tend to come in within the budget, or the schemes are managed within the funding envelope. I think, as Ben said before, that there's very much a risk going forward because of the inflation in the building industry that this might become more challenging. I wonder whether it's something you could ask when you're looking at your forward programme, if you want, in terms of your scrutiny of the financial affairs, whether you want to make sure that there is at least an opportunity for those capital report to come here, on a semi-regular basis.
I think with certain limits on the amounts we're talking about, I think that would be most useful. I'd be interested in seeing those things. I mean, not every £100,000, but certainly substantial amounts, which I don't know how I define that yet. But have we got that? Do you understand that public interest in that? I think we'd like to know more about overspends as soon as we can. Are there any other comments on the 78 pages? Harpies again? Have you still got your hand up from before?
It's another question, Chair. I'll be very quick. I just wanted to ask about, you've got a statement there about equality and diversity. And you say that you look at this throughout. It should be embedded in your processes, and you look at that throughout your projects and such. And you mentioned equality and diversity toolkit. I'm just wondering, what is that and how is that framed in your projects? So how do you look at those potential challenges or opportunities with that framework?
Who can deal with that?
Well, again, within each of the reports that we write, we have a specific section about equality, diversity, inclusion, and we also have a separate section with regards inclusive growth, and they are very much one of the things that we appraise our projects on. When some of the projects, also when projects start off, we insist that they do an EQIA, an equality impact assessment report as well, and we've got a standard template for that we do for each of the projects. That might be slightly different depending on the partner that we're working with, but quite often they are starting to use our impact assessment anyway for diversity and inequality.
Are you happy with that?
Sorry,
so is that the same as the toolkit then? What is the toolkit that's being used?
That will be the EQIA.
Okay, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a final question on projects. We talked about overspending and so on and so forth. I suppose this is a retrospective question, but just to think about learning, have there been any situations where projects have been actually scrapped or cancelled due to viability issues? Or is basically the concept of just accepting, do we accept sunk costs or not?
I suppose the sieving out of projects really is at the very start of the assurance framework, and in activity one, that strategic assessment. That's when we really determine whether or not they meet particularly the strategic need and the strategic case and meet our priorities. And that's when the sifting through of whether or not a project comes through the assurance framework is really made. And then that allows them to do a strategic outline case. And then decision point 2 is the real place where things get approved or not approved. As a general rule, I think most projects do get approved at decision point 2 because it's been through that check and challenge at the strategic assessment stage in activity 1. And then
so does that mean, Craig, sorry, does that mean that really projects will continue whatever the overspends, this, that and the other in practice?
No, I don't think. I think the main thing that we do through the appraisal system once they've got through into the assurance framework is we either divert them down a different line or they make changes to how they're to the designs or so and so forth, rather than scrapping them at the moment. I think we make sure that they're still meeting the objectives, and if they're not meeting the objectives, we try to rescope that, to get them to rescope them, and that's happened on quite a few projects recently. And one project in particular, about a year ago, came through at about a £15 million scheme, a transport scheme. We looked at that, and the benefits weren't stacking up for that sort of money, so we actually reduced it to about I think it was an £8 million scheme in the end that came through, that really met the real objectives that we needed to. Rather than scrapping it, we get them to change the scope and change things around so they do meet the objectives that we set centrally in the combined authority.
Okay, thank you.
And in those rescoping discussions, are there politicians around the table?
Not generally. That's done at officer level, and then it's the when it goes to committee for decision making, that's when the politicians get involved in that. But certainly at the start of the when we're deciding whether or not projects should go into the assurance framework or not, our policy colleagues very much have a lot of discussions with the politicians, particularly the leaders and the chief execs and so forth. I think Ben can probably answer better as well on that one.
Can I come in, Chair?
Yes, please do, Ben. Yes.
It's just to add to what Craig. I mean, I think Craig has answered the question. I'd say two things. One is we need to be careful what is defined as a project here, and Craig and his team have got a fairly tight definition of what constitutes a project. And part of the debate about what something's going to cost and what it's going to achieve, and hence what its value for money is in the formulation of that project. What I think Councillor Willard is right that once a project has been properly specified and costed, it's shown to show good value for money, has got the right risk and other elements within it, and it then goes forward to committee. We would then want to realise the benefits of that. So it isn't always, there aren't many projects that fail having got that far, but that's because Craig and the team the sponsor team that are developing the project will have been through that robust exchange to make sure that it's fit for purpose. There are nevertheless some projects that change or that stop. Not many, but some, and some. And we might see more of that through planning or other processes. But the one that springs to mind is we had a Wakefield project that I can't remember the precise details of, Craig, but was about was business grants, and in the end, because the government came in with a similar programme, that our local programme wasn't quite so attractive to the market, and in the end, we closed that project down. Have I got that right, Craig?
To be honest, I can't remember it. Ben, I have so many projects in my head, I can't remember which one you mean.
I think it was it was a broadband connectivity project, the gigabit voucher scheme in Wakefield. And you're right, Ben, that went through approved, but that came to committee to explain why it wasn't going to go forward and explain that reasoning, so members were comfortable with it.
Yeah. Chair, can I ask a question?
Yes, please, Betty. Yes.
Thank you. Okay. It's a question to Craig. I mean, there's maybe a little bit of strain into the next agenda item in terms of issues as well. But Craig, you mentioned earlier on that in terms of how management of projects, etc., in the assurance framework that you had 7 points. You had a 7-point area, but you did not necessarily need to use them all. You could, for instance, just maybe use 2. When that happens and it goes forward, what criteria or explanation is there as to why you have used those points, necessarily 2, 3, 4, or whatever?
Well, it very much depends on the complexity of the scheme. If we've done it many times and we know what we think we know what we're doing, we will let that go through less stages. If it's a lower value, we to go through our full process can take a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of resource to do so. If it's a smaller project, we want to utilise those resources as best we can, so we let them through the system a little bit better. Another one could be the political sensitivity of the project. If it's a project that we think when it goes out to consultation, engagement and consultation, that the public may not like or may have a lot of comments on, we make sure that goes through the system more rigorously than one that isn't quite so sensitive. So we do it on a project by project basis, determining how that can come through. And then obviously the other criteria we have to take, of course, is how quickly we need to get things through the process, because particularly government deadlines and money that they give us sometimes are so tight that we need to get things through the system as quick as we possibly can to be able to spend that money, because we quite often get a year to spend money and so forth. So we can't expect people to go through a 3 or 4 month assurance process.
And may I follow up, Chair, just to
well, that's interesting, isn't it? Yes.
The explanation of the reasoning of why you would use the criteria of point system. I'm sure that's got to be monitored and it is explained somewhere, rather than it be maybe somebody thinking it's the royal we.
We discuss all projects internally as officers and determine what the appropriate we call it pathway and route. So the pathway is how many decision points and activities it goes through, and then the route is who approves at each of the stages. And as every project has to come to the Combined Authority Committee at decision point 2. Whatever stage it's going through, it's got to go to Combined Authority at stages 2, and it's at that point where we have the assurance pathway and route set out in that report. And it's actually the Combined Authority who actually then. Sorry, I just got a recording stopped for some reason there. Completely took me off.
We all did, Craig. We all did.
So we actually set out in the Combined Authority report at decision point 2 exactly the assurance pathway and decision and who makes the decisions at each of those decision points at that point. So it is actually a political decision at the end of the day. It's recommended by us, but it is actually a political decision at the end of the day.
I'm grateful for that, Chair, because the process as identified in the quality assurance and the framework, the process of going through a democratic process is obviously the right way. And it wasn't mentioned in the beginning, Craig, do forgive me, but I think that explanation in itself gives the assurance to us that there is a process and a mechanism for always monitoring right to the very end to agreement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Betty. Megan has a question which is fairly fundamental, if it's the one you're going to ask that's on the chat.
Well, it was on
the
chat. Yes. And I just don't see how it starts off. I don't see where officers do one thing. No, I don't. I'm sorry. I'm totally and absolutely confused. So, I mean, have we nothing in writing that actually gives the process it goes through? Because I don't see how do we start a project? Is that officers or is it politicians?
Well, I wonder, perhaps we can have a brief and summary of the response now. And if you could have a word with Councillor Swift later, Mr. Taylor, and go through it, because it is a fairly deep and profound policy that needs explaining. So if you do summarise it now and then, perhaps have a conversation later, please.
I suppose it might be best to use a current example, really, of how things come through the process or not. And so if we take the CRSTS bid that we're just putting together at the moment and have just sent to DFT and the government, CRSTS is the new transport funding that we're getting for the next 5 years. So we've been allocated £830 million for transport for the next 5 years. So government set criteria that we need to meet through that fund. We also have then our own priorities within the combined authority that we set out. And then our policy officers go and talk to the relevant policy officers within our partner authorities and also within the combined authority. They come up with a number of projects that they feel meet the criteria that's been set. And from that, they will come out with a priority list of which projects should be funded through that fund. They then, with CRSTS, they then had to put a strategic outline case together, and that strategic outline case has to go through to DFT, and they appraise that actually to begin with, and determine which projects they're happy for us to continue with, and then once that's been approved, that will then also come through the combined authority for approval at the combined authority to make sure also that politicians within the combined authority are also happy with those projects and programs that have been agreed. Does that answer the question?
Would you still value a
yes, I
offline
would,
conversation?
please.
I think you might
Yes.
need half an hour for this.
Yeah, thank you. That would be helpful.
Yeah. Well, just to I mean, again, Craig's given an absolutely comprehensive and correct answer. I think just in terms of Councillor Swift's questions, that in short, ideas come from a variety of sources, members, officers, third parties, etc. The decision on what gets taken on is a political decision.
Right, that's what I wanted to know.
The decision about whether a project carries on, if it changes in cost or from in any other major way, is also a political decision. All of that. Does that help?
That helps a lot. Thank you.
Craig, do you want to add to that?
No, I think again, just to use a CRSTS example, that very much went to leaders and chief execs before it went through to DFT. So it is very much a political decision which projects are involved within that programme. And most of our programmes follow that route. And the same will happen with the gain share spending that we're just agreeing at the moment and so forth. So
you say it went to leaders. Is that at a meeting in which we have access to the minutes?
Sorry, I don't know. I wasn't involved in those discussions.
Do we see what debate took place, or just the decisions?
Shall I come in there? I think so that the leaders of the 5 authorities and the mayor meet informally, and that's what Craig's referring to as the leaders meeting. That's not the decision-making body. And what I was referring to with Councillor Swift is that the decision about what projects get taken on, regardless of any conversations that happen in any other forum, is taken in a committee, normally the combined authority.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jeff. Any other questions about the assurance framework, which is 78 pages, and we've all read them, I suppose? No, thank you. And we'll see it again next year, do we?
You will do, yes. We have to do it every year, that's correct. Yeah.
Right, we're on page 85, item 7, integrated corporate systems. Who's taking this? Angela?
It is me, yes, thank you, Chair. It's a brief introductory paper. It was something we talked about at a previous meeting, of something that might be of interest to the committee in the coming year. So it's a brief introductory paper to one of the projects that has been approved through the process we've just talked about. It was given approval through the assurance framework last year. We currently operate a separate finance system, a separate HR system, separate payroll system, and they have been in place for some time. We've obviously changed a huge amount as an organisation in the time since those systems were installed, which is upwards of 20 years ago. And we have been through a thorough process to identify an integrated system that will help in a number of ways. It will obviously give us newer, more modern ways of working within the system. It will give less reliance on having to dump information out the systems and manipulate it. We will be able to get better reporting out of it. It clearly removes some of the need for reconciliation between systems as information comes from one system into another. So it will give us a much more powerful tools which will help our decision making and our monitoring. So it is a big project, and we currently have, we have a very well controlled finance system. We're not going to replace it with anything other than a new finance system that is equally as well controlled, but it will be different. So there's a significant project underway. It's been quite a long time in gestation, which is probably right. We took a long time at the requirement capture stage, and also at ensuring we were gearing up in the delivery phase. So we moved into delivery phase in effect in December with mobilisation with the provider. The product we have gone with is, it's called One Council. It's used by a number of local authorities. The supplier is Technology One, who have this integrated system. We are intending to, as far as possible, use it out of the box because it comes with so many great controls and processes within it. So we're looking to adapt what we do to make the most of the functionality we get. We have kicked off with the configuration stage. We've got design workshops underway, partway through them, and they've been ongoing for the last couple of weeks. We're putting together the user groups around the organisation who could get engaged with the product and see what it's going to mean for them in their day-to-day work. And so I've highlighted this is very much a business change. It's not just a back office system. This has got to be the system that will provide information for officers, for members, that when you, for example, have lots of questions about staffing and numbers, we can produce much better reporting at the press of a button for you, rather than have to take away an action to go and work through our spreadsheets to put something together in a better format. So it is a hugely exciting project. We have a project team set up. It is reporting into the senior team within the Combined Authority. And putting it on your radar today, if it is something that you're interested in monitoring or understanding what it looks and feels like, it's one you might want to consider when you get on to the item later for your work programme for the year. I'll pause there. Happy to take any questions or comments.
Questions? George, you haven't asked a question yet? Well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Angela, as well. No, it's a really interesting thing. Thank you for doing the report and bringing the thing forward. Just wondering, are there any cost savings attached to this new way of working, either through efficiencies or in some ways packaging everything into one system and then getting rid of the other licenses?
There are at the moment. Obviously, we're paying maintenance costs for 3 different systems. It's very close. The ongoing annual costs of running this will be broadly the same, but I think the big benefit is actually in resource. It's that opportunity cost of people needing to duplicate, cross-reference, check things, run, produce separate reports. We do have a number of benefits that we're seeking to realise from the project, and we again, if you're interested in following this up later, I can share the list of the benefits that we are seeking to achieve from the project, because some are hard cash, some is resourcing. There are things around the edges of environmental, but they should stop people having to print as many bits of paper. So there's a number of elements to it, and I think we flagged in there's also some social value around the contract because of the way we currently let our contract. So there's a number of benefits out of this, but I'm happy to share that at a future time with the committee.
Mike first, and then David.
Chair, I think it is important that we bring it back at a future meeting once it's in. I've been involved in another organisation where we implemented a similar system like this, and it was a nightmare for a number of months to manage through it. I suppose the initial question is, how future-proofed is this? Is it cloud-based?
Yes.
System? So it is very future-proofed.
We hope so. It was part of our requirements capture was around the technical side of it as well, and this meets the requirements of our ICT team in terms of future-proofing it. It is cloud-based. It will allow people to access information from whatever device they've got, which currently the current systems don't. So if somebody wants to, I don't know, they book their leave and they've got their phone in their hand, they can book it through an app on their phone rather than have to log into the system. It will make things much quicker and easier to do for staff. So it will help accessibility in a wider sense as well. Clearly, it's got very tight controls in it, and I suspect that's, you referred to a nightmare. Often nightmares are about making sure the data is right and the access is right and the controls are correct.
What the issue was about one of the issues was that the information was very much out of date, but also the deduping exercise, and it's the deduping exercise that led to an issue. Thank you, Chair.
Mike and
Thank you,
then
Angela.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry for the position I'm in, but my back is in a bad state at the moment. So this may be one step too far, Angela, or a question might be, but to what extent then do the systems that the combined authority operate, the mayoral combined authority operate, have to integrate with the 5 local authorities, or will they run separately? Thanks.
No, that's a good question. They run separately. We did look at whether we could piggyback in effect on the systems that any of the partner authorities have, but our needs are quite different because local authorities have, and council tax is a good example. You're all collecting in council tax from thousands of residents. We don't do that. There's quite a lot of differences between what we do. In terms of interfaces between us, interestingly, go back to the project discussion you had, we do have some integration of claims for project costs coming from local authorities, and we'll be able to sweep that up in this system. But we don't. There are no other direct integration with local authorities. Interesting arrangements. With money changes hands following due sign off and due process, but we do operate quite separate services to those that local authorities provide.
Right. Can I just come back in then? And this is definitely a naughty question then. So in the longer term future, I know obviously we've talked about this last year in terms of procedures with regards to a mayoral precept then, in which case then there would have to be something put into the system in order for that to happen, if it was to happen in the future. Or would it then still have to come through the 5 authorities?
It would operate the same way in effect as our transport levy does, that we just get the lump of money from the local authority who does the collection of the council tax, which feeds the transport levy. Similarly, the police precept, that will all come through local authorities, do the billing and the collection on our behalf in effect, and we just get a sum of money coming in at the end of the process. That would be the same for the general precept if one happened.
Right, thanks, Anne. I think really though, that would there be then some point in the future where there may well have to be an exploration of sort of bringing in more interfaces within the 5 authorities and the MCA, because it's certainly in terms of transferring of data, it would possibly potentially make sense.
I think there is certainly some data sharing in other areas. I think when we look at money and people, that is probably unique to us, but there is another collaborative platform where information on businesses, for example, is shared. But I think that these systems, because these are very much about just our funding, our people, they will probably remain separate to local authorities. Obviously, if things change in the future, we would look at it. It's a new modern system. It should be able to cope with whatever we need to throw at it. But at this stage, we believe we've got the scope for what is needed today. We'll cross any bridges in the future if there are changes, but at this stage we don't envisage any.
Right. Thank you very much, and good luck for the project.
Thank you.
Jane?
No, Chair, I put my hand down. Mine was very much on the same theme of integration between systems.
Okay. George, did you want to come back on something?
No, mine. My question was on the same topic as David and Jane. So I think it's a really interesting system. In some ways, working between authorities and WICA would be quite an interesting thing. If we can integrate similar systems, it makes sense. And I appreciate, from following on from my other question as well, that it's not always about cost efficiencies. It's also about time and just efficiencies to people's time. It's not about hard cash. Moving forward, Angela, what are the challenges of actually implementing the system?
Oh, where shall I start? I think the challenges are it is a large piece of work. We have supplemented our teams. We've taken some of the cost is about additional people to either backfill within the finance and HR teams or to provide direct support and project support. There's a lot. We have to keep business as usual going, and there is a huge amount happening in the combined authority every day, and we can't compromise that while we focus on a new project. So I think one of our challenges is keeping all the balls in the air at the same time. But we've got a very robust project plan. We are monitoring against it, and we hope we have mitigated the risks that could come forward. I think it is the volume of work. I think it is, on the one hand, we're trying to do the data cleanse, make sure, for example, we've got all the right information ready to import into a new system, but at the same time, things are still happening. There's still new people joining the organisation, leaving the organisation. There's funding going to come in. There's new projects being. There's stuff happening all the time, and the challenge is making sure that we get to a clean data integration and clean operation at the end, which is we're due to go live at the end of this calendar year. I think that is probably the single biggest challenge.
Quite a few. So yeah, thank you, Angela. Good luck.
Thank you.
We go live when, Angela?
We're looking at end of November, early December.
Gosh. Any other questions on these?
Yes, Chair, if I may, it's Betty.
Betty and then Mel. Yes, please.
Hello. Hi, Angela. George has picked up one of the points. You can see we sit beside each other, George. You started it off in terms of the challenges. I just made notes here, looking at the time frame, etc. You said November, December, and obviously the challenges in implementation will involve a lot of training, I assume, Angela.
Yes.
Got training packages in place, because you said it goes across all the combined authority work issues. That was the first one. The second one really is, it does mention in the report, I believe, a £1.5 million cost in terms of implementation and procurement. And if we move forward, following on from George's question and as David's as well, the ability for change and add-ons. I can well remember in Wakefield many years ago when we first went to laptops, that there was a company that we got, and at the time it was the all dancing, all singing, and you could do everything at the end of the year of procurement. First of all, what's the procurement contract with this? Is there a procurement contract with this company towards your implementation? And what within that procurement, if any, has there been a challenge or a discussion about later on in terms of changes, add-ons, etc., that are not promises now but can't happen then?
Thank you. We went through an open procurement for this and selected this provider on the basis of a number of factors, which did include the element of future-proofing. I think you're absolutely right. Our current finance product, for example, the company have stopped really doing upgrades and updates to it. it is what it is, and it's a bit fixed in time. This company is very much expanding, growing, putting this product out in a number of different places. They have assured us that there is a development program, there's an active user group for users such as us to join in and suggest where we would like to see things changed, improved, and have assured us there's very much an active dialogue with all the users of the system to keep building it, to keep growing it. We have bought a number of modules, finance, HR, payroll, and procurement element. We get everything that is in that module. We will use most of it, but not necessarily all of it. So there are some things we can bring online ourselves as we get further down the track. We can change it ourselves. We will have the skills to adapt that, because that's part of the knowledge transfer from the supplier to us. So we are training up our IT team, our finance team, our HR team to be able to do the system changes as we go through. The cost of the cost of the project is the input from the supplier to set it all up for us. It includes the running cost in effect for the first few years, that because it is a cloud-based, it's a sort of service. It's not sat on our servers, it's sat in the cloud. So there is a responsibility through the contractual arrangements that they have to keep that working. And that again reduces some pressure on our ICT team to make it work on our servers. And some of the cost of that is about the people, including a business change and engagement person to be dedicated to making sure we are putting in place easy to use training manuals. We're setting up an intranet page where people can drop questions in. We'll be doing videos. There'll be a whole raft of information and training program for everybody, because I said before, everybody will use these systems, even if it's just as an employee to book that annual leave or to put information in on their annual performance review. It affects absolutely everybody, but in different ways. So we need to make sure our training is adapted for all those different audiences, from the super users who are managing budgets and need certain information, to people who just will be probably interacting with it in terms of their payslip and their annual leave and their just day-to-day employee requirements. And there's some really powerful, easy to access information there for managers in terms of managing staff. So lots of different levels, and we want to make sure that we invest sufficiently in the training, and that's starting now with getting user groups put together to make sure we've got everybody on board with what the product is and what it means for everybody.
Following from George's question, and obviously, you know, systems do change. And you mentioned about the future in terms of staffing, etc. Has there been, and is built in, a revenue implication?
The immediate revenue implications of running the system, because it is cloud-based, it doesn't matter how many users we have. So it doesn't matter if we increase numbers. So we're future-proofed in that regard. There is a contract. There will always be inflation added to contracts, because that's the way of procurement arrangement. So we have put the cost of this are in our revenue budget going forward. What we need to assess at the end of this is whether we're going to need specialist support for making future changes. As you say, if something big happens, we will certainly be equipped to do add in more people, add in different funding streams. It's whether there's something probably can't envisage yet around the corner that will need to be brought into it. But we'll explore that during the project implementation stage.
Thank you, Angela.
Betty.
Thank you.
Are you muted?
We can't hear you.
Still can't hear you.
Do you want to if you want to put a question in the chat, could try and answer it that way.
Thank you. Any other questions on item 7? Okay. Thank you. Item 8, budget and business planning.
Sorry, I think you've got Councillor Melly.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I missed that one.
Yeah, so I just want to check, have we agreed that we're going to have another item on this in the future with more information about how the implementation is going, more information about costs, more information about environmental implications. Is that what we've agreed? It says that the cost is 1.7 million, but it doesn't say if is that just a one-off setup cost, or what are the costs going to be in the long run? The point's already been made that it says what the costs are, but not what the savings are. Angela mentioned that there was going to be environmental benefits, but that's not in the report, that sort of thing. So we're going to have an update in a few months' time.
Happy to do that if the committee wishes. No problem.
And hear about how it's going implementing it, because it is quite a big change.
Or perhaps we should add that to our work programme later on in the agenda. I think that's a good idea.
We will, thank you. I haven't missed anybody else. Are you allowed to tell us?
I think, Chair, I think Councillor Melly's putting something in the chat, I think.
It's Councillor Stephen who is struggling.
I think she was putting something in the chat because her mic's not working. There we go.
Yes, good question.
Right, no, good question. We are debating whether there's a period of parallel running. There is a point at which maintaining two systems is such an overhead that it's challenging. I think it will depend on how the testing goes over the summer. We will be deciding how long we do operate both systems, but it's a good question, and I'll make sure I answer it when we come back in future with more detail.
When do you think that might be most useful?
At your disposal. We'll have made some progress. At your next meeting is only less than 2 months away. It may be the one after that might be.
I think we'd appreciate that.
But I'll flag if there's any problems at the next meeting.
Yeah, okay, that can be verbal. After that, we'd like a fairly formal report on £1.5 million project. Betty?
We can do you a written report next time if you wish. I'm just highlighting it's probably only 7 weeks away before we write those papers.
Betty, have you still got your hand up? Betty, you're muted.
Thank you, Chairman. It's been answered.
Thank you. Can I ask then, Angela, if you're allowed to tell us which organisations are running this system satisfactorily?
You can ask, but I can't recall. It's not any of our local. It's none of our local authorities. The system is actually designed. It's probably more in use by smaller authorities. And I can't remember offhand. I'll let you know after the meeting. Well, I can see it in front of me. I just can't recall it.
Chair, in answer to your question, on their website, there's a list of councils: East Riding, Mid Sussex district councils. It's mostly district councils or borough councils that are using it based on their website.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions on that item?
Yes, please. Yeah.
I can't see it. Oh, Rachel, yes, you hand again.
Yeah, sorry, I was wondering if it's is it customized in some way to suit Wyker's exact needs, or is it an off-the-shelf product?
We have the option to customize it, but we are doing our best to use it off the shelf because history shows if we start making changes just for us, then it becomes harder for the supplier to support us in future when there's upgrades and changes, and we're creating more of a problem for ourselves. If this system is in use in, as Councillor Barnes helpfully shared, quite a number of authorities, if it can work for them, why can't we make it work for us? And so we're going into it very much with that approach that it will be more effective and more efficient used out of the box. But if there is something that really we cannot live with, we have some capacity in the budget to seek a change and do that. But we are very much trying to avoid that.
So is there a kind of programme of how that will be monitored and when any decisions will be made?
There is. We are going through the configuration design stage, which is a detailed process looking at all the different aspects of what we have bought, where they're explaining to us what it does. We are then going to assess that against our requirements, and at the end of that, each of the sort of functional specialist leads will come back to say this. For example, if it's HR, head of HR will come back and say, yes, the system as it is delivered meets all these requirements that we set out. Or she will say, it meets them all except these, and these are the ones I would like us to consider changing. And we will, as a project board, look at all of that collectively at the point in the programme where it is flagged, which I think is in April. And we'll make decision then about whether we make the changes or not.
Thank you. You can see a good deal of interest in the project, so we're likely to keep us informed.
It is an interesting project.
Thank you. Anybody else want to comment on? George, is your hand still up, or is that a...
No, Chair. Thank you.
Right, we now move on. Item 8, which is you, Angela, again, budget and business planning, please.
It is indeed me again. Thank you, Chair. This is a bit of a collection of information for you following the workshop that we had back in December. We had an informal workshop where we shared some of the work that had been underway on budget, setting out some of the process we're following, some of the risks, some of the assumptions. You asked them interesting and challenging questions. We have subsequently had a further conversation with the chair, and we have provided today some further information following on from that conversation.
Thank you. Yes, much appreciated. Thank you.
I appreciate not everybody was able to be in the December session. I'll just do a very brief overview of the whole thing and where we are, and then it is sort of over to you for questions on any of the information here or not here indeed. So the budget process has been ongoing throughout the autumn and winter. We've flagged before, this is a really difficult year. I think your officers and your own authorities probably say that every year about budgets, but this year, between the pandemic, for us with the mayor coming in, with changes to our funding, changes to our work, changes to the bus industry, the pandemic's impact on the bus industry has been immense, and that is a big part of our function as the local transport authority. So we have been piecing together budget over the last 6 months or so. The Command Authority has had reports on this. You've had information to your meetings, and the Finance, Resources and Corporate Committee have been overseeing much of the detail of this. Much of the difficulty is the unknowns, and it's always the unknowns that make life difficult. But this year they seem to have been there in greater number than ever before. We're seeking to set a balanced budget for 2022-2023. We are just about there with it. We have reviewed the costs that have come in. We've reviewed the income assumptions. We have made some adjustments. There's been some helpful interesting things like the bank interest rate going up unexpectedly has generated some additional forecast income for us for next year because of the cash balances that we carry. So there's been some positives. We've had the mayoral capacity funding announced for next year. And so there's been some bits that have helped us close that gap. What it doesn't remove, however, is the challenge in setting future years budgets as well. The funding model for command authorities is extremely difficult. We have the well-established transport levy that is the route for paying for transport costs, which is a levy on the 5 local authorities. We set out the costs of providing transport at the local transport authority level, covers our concessionary travel, bus tendered services, all the other bus services, the bus stations, bus shelters, passenger information, etc. That cost is met by a levy on the 5 local authorities, and that is set in legislation and has been in existence for many, many years. All the other functions of a combined authority do not come with a funding stream attached. So it is down to us to identify funding from whatever source we can and bid to government for other funding. So all of the work on economy regeneration, all the other priorities that we have, there is no annual funding. We're not part of the revenue support grant arrangements local authorities get. We don't have we don't have generally rate, council tax doesn't come to us, business rates don't come to us. So it is difficult piecing together enough funding to pay for the whole organisation. The way we obviously bid for funding from government, that's often been primarily capital, but there is some revenue. We use some of that capital to fund some of our revenue posts, which is common to all local authorities, that the cost of bringing projects into being does rely on a team approach from across the organisation. So there is some capitalisation takes place. You asked questions last time about the transport levy. So included in there, just a quick breakdown. The transport levy we have left at the same figure as previous years. We strongly suspect that will not be enough to meet the requirement of running the bus services next year, running for the bus network to operate. So bus operators run commercial services, we fill the gaps. The operators are coming out of we've now been operating 2 years almost in pandemic situation where operators have had funding. We have continued to pay them our normal rate, and government have supplemented that with specific grants. Those arrangements are due to come to an end, but there are still discussions underway about quite how that happens. But there is a high risk that if passenger numbers don't recover, the bus operators will take action next year. And alongside that is our ambition that public transport is a critically important service to the residents of West Yorkshire. And not only do we want to maintain it where it is, we actually want to improve it. And we are awaiting the outcome of a bid to the bus services improvement plan. And we're hoping to hear that next month, which may provide us some funding, but may not, because there is a huge overbidding has happened for that pot of money. So the Combined Authority agreed in December at its meeting that it would maintain the transport levy as a commitment to ensuring we had at least a good starting point to try to keep public transport going, and the Mayor and other members have been very active in making representations to government about the importance of being able to maintain bus services next year. So the transport levies there are bits of other income I've talked about. I've included capital figures in here as well. They will definitely be reviewed and updated very soon. We are waiting for the outcome of the Sustainable Transport Fund. Craig talked about that earlier under the one of the previous items, but we have been awarded we have been told we're getting 830 million from government over a five-year package for sustainable transport to cover mass transit, various sustainable transport initiatives, highways maintenance, active travel, etc. But we haven't had confirmation. We are required to submit another business case to unlock that funding. And so that does not appear in our capital programme at this stage, but will need to be added in as soon as we get confirmation of that from government. The other interesting element that you touched on last time, which I've included information here, is the gain share. So part of becoming a mayoral combined authority brought funding functions and powers to us. That included the adult education budget, which is included in our figures. It included gain share funding, which is 38 million a year of unring-fenced funding for us, for the combined authority, to determine how to spend. Various approvals have been made. All decisions are made through the combined authority, and there's an appendix that sets out a summary of the different stage of different parts of that, of those different approvals as they have happened. So they're happening across a range of investment priorities, those investment priorities being in the West Yorkshire investment strategy, which was approved by the combined authority last summer. There will be further reports coming forward hopefully in February and in March to approve some further use of the gain share, ideally to help work up some of the pipelines of projects to ensure we've got a proper plan of how we deliver against all the investment priorities. And that will then bring into question the point I think Chair raised earlier about borrowing, because the gain share is 75% revenue and can be used to support borrowing for capital purposes. we're in a bit of a chicken and egg situation, that we need to have the capital project set out. We need to have agreement that this is the programme that the combined authority wishes to deliver over the short, medium, longer term. And then we will put against that the options to where borrowing could be used to help provide the funding to make some of that happen probably sooner than it otherwise could. But again, that will have to come back through processes in due course. At this stage, we are not assuming borrowing against anything other than what we already have in place. There's some borrowing for potentially planned in for the West Yorkshire Plus Transport Fund, which we have a reserve to fund that. Otherwise, this is quite a fluid piece, and clearly we need to get all of this drawn together to set the budget on the 3rd of February. But we will then be reviewing, updating, and I think you'll probably see some of this change over the coming year as some of the uncertainties unravel, some of the funding becomes known, as some of the work comes forward about how do we want to deliver those investment priorities. I think I'll stop there and let you come up with any questions or comments, please.
I think there may be some questions. Andrew, you got your hand up first.
Yeah, thanks for that, Angela, and really interesting to sort of understand the thought processes and everything that's going on there. When we look at the combined authority, it sits in a patchwork of responsibilities, of different levels of local government. Different mayoral combined authorities have got different powers, and it's, you look at it and think this is unsatisfactory, really, that we operate in this way. And I just wondered if there is a proactive approach to national government from mayoral authorities and mayoral combined authorities to with a vision as to what the combined authorities could be more than what they are at the moment, because I don't think they're not going to be preserved in aspic with the same powers and authority that they've had over all this time. I just wonder what can be done to have a bigger vision of combined authorities and to actually lobby government with a common vision to show what they could do, because at the moment I think it's all a bit small, really. You know, the gain share money, of course, is useful, but it's incredibly small compared with what we used to get from Europe. You know, it's a drop in the ocean compared with that. So what can we do to raise our game with national government?
There is a lot happening, and I can see Ben's put his hand up, so I think I'll give you a rest from me for a moment and let Ben step in on that one.
Please, Ben.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I mean, just to respond to Andrew's comments, the linchpin answer to this is what will be in the local in the levelling up white paper, which is due to be issued from, we understand, from the government within the next couple of weeks. The consultation, or the kind of the call for evidence for that was a while back. That paper's been some considerable time in the offing, and since that time, I think the mayoral combined authorities are coming together to work out what is their collective vision. But I suspect we now need to see what's in the levelling up white paper in order to understand what the government's vision is and whether that aligns with those of the mayoral authorities.
Okay.
Yeah, Jeff. And it's Harpreet next. Jeff.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions on the papers which have been presented. Paragraph 2.7, the latest draft budget revenue attached has a revenue funding gap of 2 million. Has that been addressed? And if it has, where's the 2 million shortfall likely to come from? 2.12, and this is an issue I've previously raised, about the 22-23 pay award. I think a 2% assumption when inflation is likely to be at 5 or 6% is unrealistic. If that is the case, I suppose the question is, for each extra 1% of pay award which you might have to pay, how much is it going to cost the combined authority, and indeed where what the contingency is for that. And I suppose on 2.16 in the gain share section, there's reference to opportunities to bring in other external funding to deliver projects. And I just wonder what those other opportunities for external funding might be. Thanks.
Is that you, Angela?
If I take those in turn, the 2 million gap is edging closer to being zero. I said we've had the confirmation of the mayoral capacity funding, which has assisted. We have got we've made some changes, some of the assumptions around staffing. We have changed the interest assumption on the interest income, from given the increase in bank base rate. We've done some minor changes around some of our, we've had to our MRP calculation, a bit around capitalisation. There's lots of little bits have gone in, but it's predominantly we've been able to confirm some of the funding that wasn't in place at the time we had that gap. Doesn't mean to say we don't continue to look at the cost we've got, and we're continuing to keep making sure we've got our expenditure down to where it as low as we can get it sensibly, so that the income can be spent on all the things we want to do. Our ambition will, I think, continue to always exceed the funding we've got. In terms of the pay award, you're right. You flagged that, and I think our reserves, our approach to our reserves policy, we don't tend to put contingencies as such in our main budget. We tend to manage risk through our reserves policy. And I didn't mention it earlier, but you have got in the paper there our Treasury management and our reserves proposal. So in that reserves, the reserves policy is done from an approach of here's our expenditure, here's our income, what is the level of risk of those not being achieved? And if the pay award were to be more, and recognise there's a real clash there between inflation and affordability within local government, we would be relying on reserves to help us out there. Our staffing figures aren't quite of the same level as those in local authorities, and for 1%, an extra 1% is probably 300,000 to 400,000 on pay, but because we recharge them to capital, it gets a little bit complicated. But ballpark, that's what we're looking at. So you're right to flag there is a not insignificant cost if pay awards were to happen at higher rates. I think that would cause consternation with local authorities as well. I think there'll be a struggle for us all to afford something, but we would have to deal with it through the risks. I'm sure there was a third point to your questions there. Apologies. What was your third?
It was opportunities for further external funding.
Yes. So some of that, generally, there is. We're waiting for the successor to the European funding, which Councillor Cooper alluded to before. So the UK SPF, we're hoping it's not external funding per se, but it's external to us. We are looking in some of our project delivery at whether there are other organisations out there who who also have the similar agenda, and whether some of the housing projects, for example, are delivered in partnership with other housing bodies, and we're able to pool funds to make more of a difference. Similarly with climate change, so our project teams are trying to work up options there. I think we also need to take a close look at the assets we have. We don't hold that many. We don't have an awful lot of ways of raising income ourselves, but we do have our bus stations. We do earn some income through the tenants at the bus stations. Those figures have taken a bit of a hit. Obviously, footfall through bus stations hasn't been what it was, and particularly some of the sales. We've lost some tenants, and others have quite rightly invoked some relaxation of what they were paying during lockdown periods. So there's a bit of a recovery there, and there is some pressure on our teams to look at where they could find additional external income to supplement what we have. But there's room around the margins there, but we need to do that. We have not balanced the budget for subsequent years, and there is still a question mark over some of the funding that we've been able to include this year's budget. We need to take a view on, will it be guaranteed going forward, or do we need to try and put other measures in place?
And Angela, thank you for that. Just one point back to the pay thing. I think it has obvious risks of using reserves to pay for ongoing baseline expenditure moving forward, because it just moves the problem into the following year. But anyway, I take thanks for your response.
No, thank you. The reserves would be to deal with it next year, because we can't readily adjust other factors, but we would then have to, you're absolutely right, we have to build it into our base going forward. We would not rely on reserves for any long-term funding of anything. It's not you're absolutely right, it's not the way they should work.
Thank you. Harpreet.
Thank you, Chair. I basically just wanted to follow on from Andrew. Really, it's more of a comment. I do agree with him. There are some concerns about the model here and how much you are still having to apply for funding from government, rather than having those funds devolved here, so we can really make those decisions. So that that is slightly concerning still to hear. And I guess the other thing I just wanted to make a comment on was what you've said around public transport. There's obviously real concerns about being able to deliver the public transport that we need to, and also I think you said in the report that you're not expecting the funding that you require from government around the bus services improvement plan. And I guess just wondering how that marries up with the very strong ambitions the Mayor has around trying to improve public transport, particularly buses, given the situation that we're in now. Are there some concerns around the ambitions there because of the circumstances we're in? That's it, Chair. Thank you.
You want to comment on that, Angela?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right to flag that. I think it is writ large across the priorities and of the Mayor and the combined authority, and a number of members on this committee have been very vocal supporters of the work we're doing, and challenges of how we've done it. But providing public transport, it is absolutely key. And I think at this stage we flag the risk, we flag what our funding availability is, and our challenge is going to be then to how it gets deployed to best effect. It's just so difficult without knowing exactly how government will undo all of its future funding. Obviously the change back to being able to work from offices does help some of the passenger numbers, but they are still significantly lower than where they were pre-pandemic. Obviously, it's whether they recover, and I think it'll be a bit of a watching game. And there will be, it's obviously something the Transport Committee are very mindful of, and we'll be keeping an eye on.
Thank you. Can I ask a little bit about gain share, which is a sheet of its own? It's Appendix 7 to Agenda Item 8, which seems to suggest that we have 28 million to spend on revenue, and we've committed 14 million this year in total revenue and capital.
Yes.
Is there a big underspend on gain share, or is there some commitments haven't yet been reflected here?
There are. That is what's been formally approved to date. I think it's one of these things that is from a standing start, it takes a while to build up its momentum, because we need to make sure all building blocks are there, that there is agreement on the priorities, there's agreement on the how the money could be deployed. I think back to Councillor Cooper's point before, that at 38 million, it sounds great, but actually it doesn't go very far, and it's quite difficult conversations about how its use is prioritised. So I think we're hoping to be able to bring a paper forward to the February meeting to start to allocate some of that this year's funding to across the local authorities to enable some work on, say, the pipeline of projects. I think that will then start to unlock it, and I think we'll be sat here in a couple of years' time where you'll be saying, "Whoa, you're overcommitting on the gain share," because I think the momentum will build. I think it's just that slow, inevitably a slower start, because it's something entirely new that we need to make sure we just have the proper process and approvals and measures in place. It can carry forward. We don't have to spend it in year, but clearly we don't want to sit on money that could make a difference. So there is very much, we want to get on with spending it. There's no point in sitting in our bank. It wants to go out there and make a difference in West Yorkshire.
Organisations will know that it's here, won't they? It's not a matter of a small number knowing and there being able to apply for the funds and
No,
get a
no,
disproportionate share. They
no,
can't.
no, this will be, you can see from some of the approvals that have been given, they're across a range of different areas, but it is all interventions projects which are being managed, delivered by us or our partners. It is not about a bidding process to anyone to come in. It is very much being managed by the Command Authority. There may be some little elements that do get given out, but that will be a sub-program within a sub-program within a sub-program somewhere. But we certainly don't, it's not there to, as a bidding, for people to bid into. It is something we'll manage very much with the local authorities, and those discussions have been underway for some months now, at officer and political level, about how we can all come together to deliver those priorities and how the gain share could be deployed for that. And hopefully we'll be able to return to this at a future meeting when that thinking's been brought forward a bit more.
Presumably keep this tracker document up to date at all times. It would be useful for us to see it, if we could please, at corporate scrutiny meetings. It's a new financial world, and I like to know where the £750,000 million a week is going. Can we ask that formally? Can we minute out, Carla, please, that we'd like to see that as often as we can, please? Are there any other questions, members? Oh, Betty, yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report, Angela. You, across authorities and yourselves, you have certainly very challenging times in terms of budgets. One or two things, if I may. Local authorities are trying to work, dependent on views of visions of settlements, to probably 2 years budgets for projects, etc. First question, in the challenging times that we're in, I'm assuming that the combined authority are working in a similar process in terms of looking ahead as much as they can with the vision. Second question, the issue of the precept, etc., from the for the transportation plan. Great difficulties, I'm sure, as you're aware, that the Transport Committee will probably be looking at it anyway, is the changes that are taking place within bus route services, the lack of drivers who are allegedly have gone to become HGVs, and obviously the bus usage is a problem as well. And as Hafif has said, it's causing difficulties, I would assume, within the business plan for the bus service. And lastly, in terms of the funding that Andrew mentioned through Brexit changes, are there any projects that are one-off projects that will finish this financial year? And are there any that we're assuming is going to go forward into the next year for the to make up the funding that's necessary? And lastly, I'm assuming, Angela, that you are the Section 105 officer for the budget process for the combined authority. And the question on that one going forward from our scrutiny committee today, which I'm sure will be addressed when the whole budget process goes in February to the combined authority. Are you satisfied with the budget presentation as it is, and indeed with any risk element within it?
Thank you. Starting at the top, I think you talked about longer term settlement, longer term funding and vision and plans. You're right, we have sought to try to, we've always tried to do a 3-year medium-term financial strategy. We have struggled with that over the last 3 years, interestingly enough, because of the devolution work and the huge change that happened during the year just ended when the mayor was elected and different funding came our way. We have shown, I think following the conversation we had at the workshop in December, we have shown the figures beyond just next year to show there is a funding gap at those 2 years. And my budget paper, when it goes forward in February, will be very clear that we can't sit back and think, phew, we've done, job done. We have future years to think about. So we'll be continuing to work to try to be able to get to a position for a 3-year position, and that marries up with the planning. And I think there's been a lot of review of business plans. The mayor coming in, the investment priorities were set last year. I think we've got things probably in place that now enables us, if we get the funding sorted out, to look a bit more longer term. So I would expect, you should expect her to see over the next year, we'll come back with a 3-year, a better, longer, medium-term planning process, and hope nothing unexpected happens. I think you talked about some of the challenges around bus services, and you're right. I think Transport Committee are very much all over this, and the Transport Scrutiny Committee. And all we're doing at the moment is saying in the budget, this is the sum we've been able to put in for it, and it will be for them to determine how best that can be deployed and manage those issues. As you rightly say, that there are shortages of drivers and loss of passengers. We have committed that any underspend on any direct bus operator spend, so concessions, we are managing to use the guidance to make a slightly lower payment. We're saying we'll set that money aside to support next year in an earmarked reserve, and that will be, we expect that to get spent next year when some of these unknowns become clear. You talked about projects, you asked about projects that come to an end next year, and a very good question. We have a number of our projects, particularly our economic directorate, so skills and business, and in that area, a lot of those projects we don't have core funding for any of those. They are funded by bids to government, bids to Europe. Some come to an end next year, and sorry, this financial year. A lot more have another year to run. The European money runs through to 2023. We are very acutely aware of that there are services, there are projects, there are interventions, there are things happening that people want to continue. So there may be an opportunity through some of the work being done on gain share to fund some similar projects going forward. What we have, and we're also hoping that the UK SPF gets announced, the Shared Prosperity Fund, successor to European funding, will get announced sooner rather than later, and that we can then move some of the people we have onto some of the projects funded by the UK SPF. But that is a risk, and that is set out in the latest draft of the budget paper, because we're saying we are in effect going to underwrite the cost of the handful of staff whose work technically comes to an end in March, but who we believe there will be funding beyond that. We are still waiting for confirmation of funding from the LEP, not from the LEP, sorry, from government for LEPs. So the Growth Hub, for example, that's been running for a number of years, we don't have that funding confirmed, but we are holding our nerve and hoping that that happens. But again, if that doesn't, that's a risk we'll have to come back to in March to address. And your final question, combined authorities responsible finance officers, are Section 73 for technical legal reasons. That is me. I will not release a budget paper that I'm not comfortable with in terms of the information in it being accurate, sufficient, and setting out the risk. I won't put my name to it until I'm happy with that. So you can, once it is published next week, that will be a paper I am happy to put forward for approval by the combined authority.
Thanks, Angela. Yes, Andrew, we must ask people to be brief from now on. We're moving to the end of our allocated time. So
okay, I'll do my best. So visibility is with some of the funds and how they're dealt with is something I'm really quite interested in, because a lot, gain share funding, other funding that comes from the combined authority. So sometimes it doesn't get seen in terms of how it's applied for. It appears all of a sudden. It's not necessarily gone through full council meetings, and so I wonder about the visibility. I mean, I discovered that the Better Building Fund had supported the Rugby League Museum in the George Hotel. That came from West Yorkshire Combined Authority. Now that's not happening now. So I've got a number of questions about that, which I'll probably do in another place. But if that had gone to full council in somewhere, if it had been more visible, we'd have a better knowledge about it. And so I do wonder about the governance of some of the funding in that way. Just the other thing I want to mention was about is it right to spend or not to spend? At the moment, there's a real issue with capacity for a lot of projects, a shortage of staff, and so prices go up, inflationary prices go up, and I wonder whether there is we need to change gear from being a procurer of projects to being a developer of the market in terms of training and building capacity, and whether we actually ought to be focusing on that element of things to try and make the market better in terms of the skills we need, rather than funding projects. I know there's always going to be a bit of a
I'll come back very briefly on those, if I may. Getting Building Fund, yes, one of the projects we have part funded some of the work being done to the building in Huddersfield. The Getting Building Fund went through the assurance framework, so approvals were made by the Combined Authority. And if you're interested, we can ask somebody to dig those out for you. The interesting question.
Interested in that one.
Interesting question about the visibility of funding, because some funding, we'll take that away and have a look whether there's something we can helpfully share with you in future, because all our money that is paid out to somebody else has gone through a due process, and just how we can make that accessible, and we're happy to look at what we can do on that, because our intention is certainly not to, everything should be transparent, and if it's not as transparent as you wish, we can
cabinet that it usually goes through, and sometimes that doesn't necessarily reach the majority of members.
Yeah, and I think the last one about making the market, I think Ben wants to come in then, is I think you're right. I think we recognise we have a role to play in that. I think it's very hard to reconcile that with the timescales we get given to deliver projects against as well. But it's a fair point to make, and certainly we do look at how we can spend the money to best effect, I suppose, in the region, and how we can help use that to build capacity and improve skills in the region and grow our own. I think we're early on that journey, but it's certainly something that has been flagged by Combined Authority members as well.
Thank you. Ben, do you want to?
Yeah, very briefly, given the time, just to say to Councillor Cooper's comments that the Getting Building Fund is a good example where combined authorities across the country and other local authorities were approached to put together schemes and propositions for a government competition at very short notice. So local authorities had to work to prepare schemes suitable for that submission. They then go into a government competition. Some months later, the government decides, and did decide in this case, what it wanted to support. And at that point, because we're out of a competitive competition, they then go into the public domain through the combined authority. So we can dig the references out for you, but from kind of early 2020, you'll see the list of projects that were supported by government through the Getting Building Fund. And one of the questions I think gets asked by that is, so from a combined authority perspective, we've listed out the projects, they're in the public domain, it's very clear what the procedures are. But how do we make sure that those in local authorities also get to see those if they're not automatically looking for them? So it's one of the challenges we have, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions to officers on the budget paper? Shaking heads. Agenda item 9, Corporate Scrutiny Work Programme. Carla, do you want to add anything to the paper?
Bearing in mind it's 12 o'clock and pretty much end of the meeting, what I can do is circulate a draft agenda for members to comment on. There's a few things we haven't looked at that was on the work programme we haven't looked at yet, such as cyber security, things like that. So I can draw up a draft agenda based on what's left in the work programme. But if any members want anything on it, it's important that we make sure we do everything that we said we'd do at the beginning of the year. But if there's anything else, for example, today members have said, they want certain things, we can make sure that they're on the work programme. I've made a note of it all. That's all really.
Thank you. We don't meet again officially till March the 11th. The world will be a different place. That seems a long way off, doesn't it? Thank you. Thanks to officers who answered questions with remarkable patience. It was very, very helpful. Thanks to people behind the scenes. Celia prepared some information for us at very short notice that we asked for last week, so we appreciate that. And we'll meet on again in 6, 7, 8 weeks' time.